Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to offer a theory to try to explain the holograms in Star Trek Discovery, which seem to contradict the other Star Trek shows because up until Deep Space Nine we never saw anyone in Starfleet using holograms as a way of communication. They always used the view screens to do it, and when they first started using holograms for communication on Deep Space Nine, everybody reacted as if it's a brand new thing which never existed before. So that seems to be a contradiction with Star Trek Discovery, which takes place a century earlier, and it shows that basically everybody uses a holographic communication, and even in everybody's quarters they seem to be able to communicate with holograms. So it seems to be a widespread technology that is used on all the ships. We see it being used on several different ships. We always see people talking using holograms. We even see people using a holographic mirror to look at themselves, and then the hologram looks perfect. It doesn't look glitchy, unlike those holograms in which you talk with people, which do seem to be of lesser quality. So presumably it's because of the long distance communication, but if you simply ask the computer to create a mirror of yourself, then it creates a perfect hologram of you. And they even show that they have a holodeck on the ship, which seems to contradict the first episode of Star Trek TNG. Everybody who goes into the holodeck for the first time is absolutely amazed by it. Now, I guess it can be explained away by saying that they are simply amazed at the quality of it. So it's not as if holograms did not exist before. It's simply that the quality of this specific holodeck is so much better than what they saw before. So I guess we can explain it away that way. Maybe because the holodeck also creates all the smells, all the sounds, that everything looks totally real, that they can touch the objects. So previously maybe they couldn't touch the holograms. In the animated show, which was taking place shortly after the original series, they also had a simulation room. We can argue whether or not that's canon, but it takes place after the original series, so it's not really a big deal because we can assume it was a brand new technology that was introduced right after the original series, and maybe it was imperfect. It's an animated show, so we can't really see how well of a hologram it is, even though Janeway and Ensign King directly stated that there were no holodecks in the 23rd century. So maybe it just wasn't called holodecks, maybe because the holograms were not tangible, we couldn't really touch them. So maybe that's the biggest difference with the holograms in TNG. Also, I think saying that Deep Space Nine was the first time that anyone ever used the holographic communication, also I think we can actually dismiss that because in TNG we did see people use all kinds of holograms even in their own quarters. We saw Riker watching some holographic women dancing, and we saw Picard looking at all kinds of holograms in his ready room, and so I do think holographic communication probably would be technically possible. It simply wasn't really popular for some reason. People preferred the view screen. Maybe it was some kind of security precaution not to allow hologram communication, because that way some kind of spy might hack into the system and look at things he's not supposed to, and so communicating through view screen was probably safer. I made a whole video about that once to explain that point. If you look at the bridge, for example, you see that all the most important stations are actually turned away from the view screen, such as the tactical station. You can't see what's going on it from the view screen, and so maybe this design was deliberate to prevent enemies from seeing anything they're not supposed to. So if someone is looking at the bridge from the view screen, then he will not be able to see the other side of the tactical station, or the operation station, or the navigation station, and not even the captain's little screens on his chair, because they do seem to be hidden from the view screen as well. So maybe that's why communication was limited to the view screen, because if someone can appear as a hologram and walk all over the bridge, then maybe he'll be able to look at things he's not supposed to. Or the scanners themselves will be able to send that information to the enemy, and someone might hack into it and so on. So I guess that can be used to explain why holographic communication wasn't used until Deep Space Nine. And in Deep Space Nine, the hologram appeared in a very specific place on the bridge and couldn't walk all over the place. So maybe the reason was because of security concerns. You cannot allow hologram to roam around the ship like we see in Star Trek Discovery. So maybe it's a lesson that Starfleet learned and implemented later, and that's why holographic communication was severely limited and went out of fashion, because in early TNG we do see people using holograms, so technically it should be possible to use holographic communication, and yet they don't use it. And in one episode we saw a Ferengi actually projecting himself to the bridge to talk to the crew, and so obviously this was possible. And so I guess we can explain away the continuity problem with Deep Space Nine, but the biggest problem is the fact that in the original Star Trek show we never saw anyone using holograms at all. So I guess the only explanation would be that using holograms was banned directly after Star Trek Discovery and before the original series, because if the technology exists, then it makes no sense that no one would use it again just a few years later unless it was banned for a good reason, such as a security risk. But I think there's another way to explain it away, and that is by saying that maybe the holograms we see in Star Trek Discovery are not actually holograms. Maybe all the members of the crew have a special device inside their eye which allows them to see these holograms. So it's not really a tangible hologram in any way, and someone without the device would not even see it. And we can just say that maybe we as the audience simply see the same thing that the characters are seeing through their eyes, and so we see the holograms as well, but someone without the device would not actually see it. Just like they showed us with the universal translator, they actually do still hear the original language and they listen to the device, and then we as the viewer start to only hear the device, but that's not the way it's actually happening in the reality of that universe, meaning the characters actually do hear the original alien language as well, and they hear the translation simultaneously. It was very clearly shown to be that way in a few episodes they showed us. Someone starts to use the translator and suddenly we as the viewer start to hearing only the translator and even see the lips matching, but in the reality of that universe, the alien is still speaking the alien language. And so maybe similarly to this, we see everything from the eyes of the characters, and so we also see the holograms. And this way we can assume that maybe holograms did exist in the original series, but we simply didn't see them as the viewers. We were not yet shown that. So maybe whenever someone was talking through a view screen, maybe he actually did see a projection of that person or those planets or whatever, as if in the middle of the bridge, but we as the viewer only saw it on the view screen. And the same whenever they looked at all kinds of controls, maybe they actually saw more elaborate representation as a hologram in their eye, but we the viewer only saw them using the normal panels and we didn't see the hologram, so we can explain all of that this way. So I think that also would be a neat way to explain it, and we can also tie it with a universal translator, because we always see the alien's lips move exactly the way we hear it in English, but it doesn't really make sense. We always kind of accepted that it's just theatricality. Just accept it because it would be ridiculous to film it otherwise, so just imagine that their lips do not match what we hear. But I think we can say that maybe the universal translator is also tied to the device in the eye, and maybe it makes everybody see the lips move in a way that matches what you hear in English to make it more comfortable for the one using the translator. So it is a way to explain that away as well. Maybe we can say it kind of projects the new image of their lips moving to match whatever they hear in the translator. And also we can use that to explain the fact that whenever we see Starfleet officers going over to alien ships and alien planets, they seem to be able to operate alien technology without any problem. Even if it's aliens they never encountered before, they still oftentimes are able to use their keyboards and their panels and their screens without any problem. So how does that make sense if the translator only translates the audio? They still wouldn't be able to understand anything which is written down. But if the universal translator is actually connected to a screen they have in their eyes, then maybe it can project an image of the translation into their eyes, and this way they would see everything in English. They would be able to operate alien technology if the translator is actually showing everything to them in a way they can understand. And so it would explain all those times in which we see Starfleet able to use alien tech without any problems. And so I actually think this kind of explanation should be introduced into Star Trek. This is something they probably should actually show us, and it might explain all these little problems throughout the various series, such as why they see the alien lips moving in English when they talk in an alien language, how can Starfleet officers use alien technology, how they are able to read in alien languages, and maybe we can even accept that the characters are seeing all kinds of holograms that do not actually exist if they didn't use the device in their eye. And this would explain the problem in Star Trek Discovery with the holograms. They can simply say it's not real holograms, it's simply projections into the eyes of the characters, and we, the audience, see it from their point of view. And then we can assume that whenever we saw the original series, we simply didn't have the device in our eyes as the audience, and so we didn't see any holograms. And by the time of TNG, maybe the holograms became more tangible, and so they no longer needed any devices in their eyes to see it, and that's why they were so amazed to see real holograms, and not just stuff in the screen of their eye. And so I think this would actually be a neat explanation. And I think we actually have a bit of evidence for this in one of the episodes of Star Trek Discovery, the one about the space whales, which I agree is a terrible way to call that space creature. I mean, when they beam it over to the ship, it even makes sounds very similar to whales, and we see it having a blowhole, and it seems to spit out air or something, which doesn't make sense if it's a space creature. Why is it making sounds like a whale in the ocean? That was kind of ridiculous, but the idea of creatures living in space, that is something that was shown in the other Star Trek shows as well, so I don't think it's a continuity problem, even though, again, in TNG they were always so amazed to see a space creature. So why were they so amazed if it's so common? But I guess if we say that all these space whales actually went extinct by the 24th century, then it would make sense. So it's not really a big issue. So anyway, what I want to mention is the fact that when they beam that space creature into the shuttle bay, we see one of the medical crew members scanning the creature, and if you look closely, you can notice that something is flickering inside his eye. And then he starts to talk about the readings without looking down at any device. So I think that scene was supposed to indicate that he gets those readings directly into his eye, and he doesn't actually have to look at any device. And so this seems to fit the theory that all the Starfleet officers have some kind of device inside their eye, which is helping to show them all kinds of stuff which we might not even see as audience members. So maybe in the original series they did see all kinds of stuff like that, but it never showed it to us. And this would basically solve this continuity problem of holograms existing in Discovery. So maybe it's not really holograms, maybe it's something that they all see inside their eye. And so I think we can use this scene I mentioned to kind of prove this theory, because this medical officer scans that creature and starts explaining stuff about it without looking at anything else, and we clearly see some kind of flickering inside his eye. So I assume that's meant to show us that he has some kind of internal screen inside his eye, and he's seeing all kinds of stuff and readings that we don't see. And so I think this actually would be a neat way to explain a lot of little silly stuff in all of Star Trek. So if they expand upon it in the next season, if they do it right, I actually wouldn't mind this explanation. I think it would actually make sense and be kind of neat if they do this. So that's my opinion on that. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we can discuss it in the comments. Let me know what you think, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.